A Metroid game without bosses is like a nice plate of spaghetti and meatballs with no sauce. You may have some phenomenal gourmet spaghetti lore and some rich and expertly seasoned meatballs of areas to explore, and a fine dusting of Parmesan cheese that is the excellent combat systems these games have to offer. But the sauce ties it all together. So I decided to take a look into my Italian grandma's pot that's been on the stove for a week now and rank every boss fight in Metroid Dread from best to worst. My name is Rusty Nails, this is Analog Sticks, let's go. Who would want dry pasta? That's just boring. Alright, now before we get into the nitty gritty, I've got to go ahead and give you that same old disclaimer that comes at the start of every ranking video ever, and that is that these are just my opinions, so take it easy on me. That doesn't mean you can't be mad or disagree with me, but if you could at least be civil about it, that would be awesome. Secondly, there's a couple of things that I need to set straight. In Metroid Dread, there are a few bosses or mini-bosses that are repeated with slight variations multiple times over the course of the game, and I'm going to be looking at each of those as one conglomerate, so the Emmys, the Central Units, the RoboChozo Warriors, and the regular Chozo Soldiers will each only appear once on this list. Also, it should go without saying, but I think a spoiler warning may be necessary, because I'm not going to explain the whole plot, but maybe a couple things here and there, so be warned. Also, my personal rankings will be based on the fight's difficulty, the boss's appearance and their presence, and just how cool and good the fight feels. So with that being said, let's go! Number 11. I always feel bad picking something to be last, and this is no exception. The Central Units unfortunately land at the bottom of this list for me, but that's not to say that I don't like them, it's actually quite the opposite. These big robotic eye-brain things are the perfect nod to the game's predecessors, with the laser donuts and the turrets blasting at you from all angles. Personally, I got really excited when I saw this, and I was instantly reminded of approaching Mother Brain in Super Metroid for the first time, but unfortunately, that's all these things really have to offer. Sure, they progressively get a little bit more difficult as we get deeper into the game, and there is something incredibly satisfying about weaving around all the projectiles, but other than some nostalgic imagery, these guys don't offer much more than that if you ask me. Also, I do think it's neat that they are the AIs controlling the Emmy and that they do hold the energy necessary to defeat them, but I can't rank them any higher than last. Number 10. I don't know if this is just a mad because bad thing or what, but I personally really didn't care for the RoboChozo Boys. These automated replacements for the Machine soldiers infested by X are pretty neat, but their stature isn't that impressive and I don't really think they look all too cool. I also don't like their attacks and I kind of groan when I have to fight one of them. On top of all that, this one always kills my boss rush pace and that's just not cool, dude. Seriously though, my biggest problem here is that I always feel like these fights get stale with repeated efforts. They kind of just feel like bullet sponges after a while to me, and that's the main reason I'm not much of a fan of Borderlands 3 or other games like that. This fight just feels a lot more like surviving than attacking to me, and that's not what a Metroid fight should be in my eyes. Also, I want to complain about the counter. The fact that there isn't any kind of cool cinematic is pretty lame, but the fact that they also just kind of get up and it's a little tough to read when their stun ends just annoys me. The only reason that this one isn't last is because it is capable of killing me and there's a lot more going on than there is with the Central Units. I mean, after all, they are mobile, but I'm just not a big fan. Number 9. Alright, I'm gonna go ahead and get in front of this. I don't know how to pronounce words. Is it SQ? This X-infested big Beetle Buggy boss boy is one that I can recognize as good, but I just don't really care for. This fight gives me a lot of Fantoon vibes in the way that it isn't always vulnerable, but I actually do kind of like that fight. This one's attacks are pretty good, with the big exploding energy orb and the heat-seeking energy beams, and the invulnerability stripping charge move. But as I said, my biggest gripe here is that it just feels like a lot of dead time waiting for the charge, giving me an opening to attack. And that's fine enough, but I also feel like these attack windows are often too short, leaving me waiting for far longer than I'd like to. You might just say that I'm impatient, and I'll probably agree with you on that, but this boss ends up down here because of it. Fight me. Number 8. Okay, I may just have a things against bugs, because coming in at number 8 is Golzuna. This big— wait a second, is he an insect or a crustacean? That's not important, this boss is just okay. Much like SQ, this boss is an X-infested monstrosity without any counters. One thing I would like to point out here though is the arena design. Normally I feel like there's plenty of room to move around when fighting bosses in this game, and the size of this creature makes the room feel so small and tough to move around. I think that makes this fight even better though, because when the boss turns red and charges me, it's a challenge both in timing my evasion and ensuring I'm going to get past the behemoth. This fight's pretty well paced in my opinion and all around quite solid, but I think the light dot attacks are a little lame. All in all, I wish that there was one move to counter and at least one more unique attack, but all in all, I can't really complain about this one. Number 7. The extraplanetary multiform mobile identifiers, or Emmy as you probably know them, are a little tough to rank for me. Honestly, I'm not sure if it's fair to even count them as bosses, but I really wanted to talk about them because there is so much good to be had in these bots. Of course, there are all the story implications with these things being sent to the planet to investigate the X before us and then being hacked into to hunt us is a really cool plot point. But what really stands out to me is the way that they helped this game earn the title of Dread. The feeling of being chased down by an Emmy with no way to defeat it is absolutely amazing, and the music here alone is up there with Breath of the Wild's Guardian theme as one of the most triggering tunes ever. The feeling of being the prey instead of the predator for a change is amazing, and when you finally get the chance to take them out after wiping out their AI control unit and stealing its energy is a drug like no other. Also, much like the central units that control them, these bad boys get a little bit more difficult with each appearance, but unlike their controlling contemporaries, the Emmy each get a unique ability that can be used to upgrade Samus's power suit once you defeat them, which is just an awesome touch. The only reason I didn't put these much higher is because there isn't really too much of a fight. It's more like an ominous episode of Tom and Jerry than it is a boss fight, but I still absolutely love these things. Number 6. Am I allowed to put a water boss in the top half? I don't know, I'm just gonna leave Druggica here. Is that how you say that? I have no clue. That being said though, this weird encased aquatic thing is actually a solid boss fight. The attacks are all really good with the tentacles lunging at you and the energy balls slowly floating down from above, but what really makes me enjoy this fight is the mechanic with the water level. Once you hit this little bulb-like thing above the boss enough, the whole thing goes limp and you have to hit this button behind you until it changes to green, then grapple onto the ceiling and do the same thing on the other side. While that sounds straightforward enough, there is somewhat of a tight timer here that will allow the boss to get back up if you don't hit both buttons quickly enough. It's not incredibly difficult to get them both, but if you're not paying attention and you make a goof or two, you will end up with an extra cycle, and I think that's a cool mechanic. Once you've successfully hit both buttons though, this big bulb thing will open up, exposing this weird uvula looking thing. This allows you to wail on it with some missiles, and what really seals the deal for me with this fight is the counter before it closes back up. After a set amount of time wailing on it, this tentacle here will thrash at you and give you a chance to deal even more damage before starting the next phase. While the cinematic isn't anything too cool or special compared to some of the later ones, it's still a really cool feeling hitting it, and I must say I really appreciate that. Also, I don't know of any good lore on this thing, so if you do, I'd love to hear it, but for now I'm just going to be leaving this one here. Number 5. These X-infested members of the Machine tribe make for an amazing fight multiple times on our journey through the latter half of the story. The Chozo Soldiers initially had me groaning as I first expected the RoboChozos, but, alive, and I must say I was pleasantly surprised. These spear-wielding soldiers make for quite an adversary in a well-paced fight, and their attacks start out as simply just spear thrusts, both from the skies and then also right next to us. But once the X-Parasite gets tired of taking hits, it grabs the reins and takes the fight to the next level. The attacks essentially remain the same as they were in Phase 1, but now they're on X-Parasite fueled steroids, and the counters here, while not mind-bogglingly cool, are much better than the robots, and the mandatory counter to end the battle is always an awesome feeling. Lastly, the later golden versions with their grapple beamable shields are a very nice touch, and all in all, I absolutely love these fights, and the fact that they were locked away is a really cool backstory. Number 4. This one may just be a nostalgia pick, but I absolutely love fighting Kraid. Wait a second, this was my first Metroid game. I've since gone back so I can respect the history, so I'm nostalgia by proxy. Moving on. If you've played a Metroid game in the past, odds are you probably know what you're going to be doing here. Feed him a healthy diet of missiles until he dies. The patented claw throws, torso spikes, and puke balls are back in full HD glory for the first time, and it's a great feeling. One change from his appearance in Super Metroid that landed Kraid at the top spot of that ranking is the platforming in Phase 2 that has now been swapped out for a single magnet strip you can cling onto on this back wall. Speaking of Phase 2, I absolutely love everything about it. I mean, you're still getting claws, but sometimes he'll try to knock you down with this left jab that I initially thought would instantly send you back down to ground level, but when I found out that could be avoided, I was in awe. Lastly, the counter up here when he tries to swatch you off the magnet is awesome. The idea of holding open the jaws of the beast like Steve Irwin in order to ensure he's earning his dessert is the best, if you ask me. I honestly think that this fight is just as good as it is in Super Metroid, if not a little bit better. So that means everything from here on in this ranking is better than every boss in Super Metroid. Oh boy, if people weren't already pissed, they sure should be now. Number 3. The first big baddie we stumble into after starting our journey on ZDR is this stealthy reptilian figure with some rough breath. In my opinion, Corpus is an amazing first boss, and its attacks aren't too complicated with its 2 tail swipes and 2 mouth moves. I don't think that's the best way to word that. I love a good destroyable projectile, and he's got those, but the simple premise of ending up inside or outside of his tail on this attack right here is something that I really enjoy. However, if that alone was all it was working with, we wouldn't have anything too special here, but its cloaking ability adds an extra level of depth that I really appreciate. Additionally, I love the cinematic sequence after sliding underneath it and countering its tail attack. This was the first taste of one of these that we get, and while it's not the coolest one, it's still absolutely stellar. Sure, this boss could have certainly been more fleshed out, but I love seeing it a few times before we fight it, and I might be giving it a little bit too much slack for being the first one, but I love this boss. Number 2. If for some reason you're unaware, Samus's Chozo DNA Donor is the main antagonist of Metroid Dread. From the very beginning of our trip to ZDR, Ravenbeak is built up to be an unstoppable force, albeit he's his own personal hype man, which is a little weak in hindsight. As for the battle against our part-genetic father, I must say I absolutely love this fight. The distinct phases paired with quick yet evadable attacks make a beefy, challenging fight that I love to pieces. Additionally, the cinematics whenever you get one of the seemingly rare opportunities to counter his attacks are the best the game has to offer, bar none. Also, the man kind of lives up to the reputation he builds for himself, well, you know, except for the parts which he says he can't be defeated because, spoilers, he gets defeated. While I love this fight, there are a few nitpicks I'd kinda like to air out, and while they're nothing massive, they did dampen the experience a little bit for me. While I said that I absolutely love the distinct phases of this fight, Phase 1 and 3 are nearly identical, with the latter just having a couple of new attacks the boss will throw at you. Additionally, he feels kind of like a bullet sponge to me at some points, and I understand that this is the final fight and that it's supposed to be a true challenge and a test of both durability and offense, but at times it just dragged on a little bit too much for me and it started to feel a little repetitive, especially in some of the subsequent playthroughs. That, however, doesn't detract from the experience enough to hurt his ranking, as I love the way this game makes you use the entire arena over the course of the fight, especially in the second aerial phase. And the difficulty is perfect for a final fight if you ask me. I died several times on my first playthrough, and even now playing it back, a couple of slip-ups can still wipe me out. But it feels like that one mobile game that was a fad a few years ago where you control the ball that rolls and jumps on the tiles with all sorts of objectives. I think there was something to do with music. I doubt you know what I'm talking about, but anyways, I feel that each time you fight Ravenbeak, you can pick up on 1 or 2 new little tricks to help you get a little farther each time you fight him, and that progression feels amazing, leaving me incredibly satisfied after completing this game. Number 1. I don't know if this is controversial or not, but I absolutely love experiment number Z57. Well, no shit, you ranked it number 1. Hey, leave me alone, I'm trying to have a good time over here. Experiment number Z57 has almost every staple of a Metroid boss that I love. There are distinct phases, fun unique attacks, and all sorts of colors that I really appreciate. One thing that I need to point out is the way that the game hints that you'll be fighting this thing from way earlier on in the game when we first see it being, operated on, I think? I know the game hints at a couple of other bosses before you fight them as well, but this one is the only one that I really noticed on my first playthrough, so bite me! That plus the build-up after it stops the reactor, keeping the planet thawed, causing us to traverse the frozen world, is absolutely one of my favorite segments in this game. As for the showdown with the monstrosity, there's more to talk about than I have time to explain, but the attacks can basically be broken down into swipes, vomit, more vomit, Flappy Bird vomit, hunkering down to vomit, and, you know, more vomit. While that all may sound very samey, the game does an amazing job at making all of the attacks feel very unique despite them being somewhat similar. I love the way it makes players have to use several abilities both fighting the boss and to evade its attacks, and it really makes it feel like you're earning a victory here. And I know I've said that some fights seem to drag on a little bit and feel a little slow paced, and this one does have that a little bit, but not enough for me to warrant actually complaining about it. My only real complaint here has to do with user error and me not realizing that you have to use the storm missile when the boss hunkers down with 4 legs to blast you, and I kept evading it my first playthrough. That didn't bode too well for me, as you can't end the fight without stopping that attack, so I spent about an hour on this bad boy just trying to withstand it until I looked it up and realized how much of an idiot I am. I don't know if that led to me having a greater appreciation for the fight or not, but I absolutely love this fight, hence it takes home the #1 spot on this ranking. Well, there you have it. That was my ranking of the bosses of Metroid Dread. So let me know what you think down in the comments. Am I an idiot? Did your favorite boss get snubbed? Or am I the most pristine individual for my taste of massive foes? Before you go though, don't forget to like and subscribe. Also check out my podcast as well as my Patreon and Twitter, which will both be linked down below. Thank you all very much for joining me today. Once again, I am Rusty Nails, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.